I'm delighted to welcome you to another collaboration between the Albany Public Library and the Adirondack Experience in this year's DACKS Drink Series. I'm Will Takish, Adult Services Librarian at the Albany Public Library. I'd like to start this evening's program by acknowledging that the Albany Public Library is situated on the land of the Mohawk, Haudenosaunee, and the Stockbridge Munsee Band of Mohicans. The Adirondack Experience is situated on the Aboriginal territories of the Mohawk and Abenaki communities. Indigenous people continue to live in our two regions and practice their teachings and life ways. Tonight, we are joined by Josh Weise, Tanner Hockey, and Garrett Kopp, who will be sharing a taste of Tupper. Josh Weise is the brewer at Raquette River Brewing. Originally from Adams, New York, Josh, his wife, and his dog relocated to Tupper Lake, and quickly all three of them fell in love with the Raquette River Brewing. Josh's passion for craft beer was recognized, and he was sent to Schenectady County Community College to complete the Introduction to Craft Brewing and Distilling program. Tanner Hockey has been employed at Raquette River Brewing since 2014. Tanner is a lifelong resident of Tupper Lake. He has also completed Introduction to Craft Brewing and Distilling program at SCCC. Tanner is involved with brewing as well as mechanical and plumbing work at the brewery. Greg Kopp also grew up in Tupper Lake and naturally formed a close relationship with nature from an early age. He began harvesting chaga and selling it at local pop-up markets with his grandmother when he was 15. While attending business school at Clarkson University, Garrett began turning his passion for wild chaga into a career-oriented enterprise, which he named Birch Boys. Garrett is a certified mushroom identification expert and also a licensed New York State guide. Throughout the evening, please feel free to submit any questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll take questions as possible at the end of each segment. Josh and Tanner, take it away.
Hi, I'm Tanner from Raquette River. We're in our grain room right now. I'll give you the backstory behind the brewery, and then we'll get into how we make beer here. So Raquette River has been open since 2013, and since then we've expanded exponentially. We started on a 2-barrel system, went to a 4-barrel system, and now we're up to a 10-barrel, and then hopefully we're going up to a 20 in hopefully the next couple of years. So right now we're in our grain room. This is where we keep all of the grains. The grain is where you're getting all your sugars and colors and a lot of the flavor in beer. And without it, you're not making beer. So there's different kinds of grains. You like these grains, the ones with the black on them. They're called base malts, and these are the primary majority of beer. Most of the grain in your beer is these malts. And then farther down here we have like some specialty grains, like a Munich malt or a Vienna malt, and those will add caramel flavors or color, also hues of red and stuff like that into your beer. Except grain has to get malted before it can become, like if they had grain right out of the field, you can't just turn that into beer. So there's people called maltsters that take the grain from the field and they malt it. So what they do is they basically germinate, they start germination of the seed, and then when it's starting to show like the root a little bit, they put it in a kiln, completely dry it out. And what you end up with is a very high protein rich kernel. And then what they do is they run it through a grinder or a mill, and then you get what this is. It's just crushed grain, and all those white particles in there it's basically protein. So from here we'll go into the brewery, and I'll show you the mash tun where all the grain goes. Right here we have this is our mash tun. So this is where we dump our grains in, and these are called false bottoms. So the grain will normally there's two here, but just so I can show you what it looks like on the other side. There's the grain will sit on top of these false bottoms, and then the grain can't get through, but the wort or what you're making is called wort can make it through, so you can move all of that liquid to the next kettle on. Now, and what happens is we're gonna control temperature in here between like 148 to 162 degrees. But ideally around 154 is prime, because what happens is that all those proteins get broken down into fermentable sugars. So unless if it's below 148, you're not going to have effective breakdown of those proteins, and then you're going to end up with not very strong beer. And then temperature also affects in your mash is at the lower your mash temperature, the thinner the beer will be. So if you're trying to make a lager or a pilsner, you're going to be hanging around 150 degrees, whereas if you're trying to make a thick, heavy stout, you're going to be up in 158 or even 159 to get a thick body. And then so on these the smaller systems you don't have these, but on this system we do. These are called mash rakes, and what these do is they spin around as we're dumping grain in. They spin and they evenly distribute all those grains, and they also help exponentially when you're trying to get all this grain out of the mash tun. So we usually do about an hour on your mash. So we put in anywhere between it's like 500 pounds to on one of our lighter beers to up to maybe almost 900 pounds of grain on a stronger beer, like a double IPA. So you do that for about an hour, because that's pretty much the maximum. It's the most time you need to get the most effective breakdown of the proteins. Anything after that is you're not gaining anything out of that. So I guess we'll move over here. So after your hour is over, we're gonna do what's called a wort backflow. So this is our control board. We control this whole brew system on. We control the whole brew system on this board right here. Well, this board, and we have a touch screen up there we can show you too, but basically we have these little connector pipes. These pipes, we can pick whatever way we want that wort to go to. So when I'm doing, after my mash, I'm going to do a wort backflow. It'll pump it from here through these pipes, and then it's going to fill up with, this is called a wort drain tank. So, I'll let it fill up with liquid, and then we'll come up here. There's a pipe that comes out. It's right here. So that pipe, the wort from the bottom is going to go up through all that stuff and out of this pipe, and we'll recirculate that over the top of the grain. So any fine particulates or anything gets filtered out. So you end up using your mash as a filter. And then after that, you do what's called a sparge. So over here we have a hot liquor tank. And all a hot liquor tank really is it's a glorified hot water heater. It's a really, really big hot water heater. And so when our mash is over, we need to, that's only about 5 barrels worth of wort, and it's really strong wort. So you need to dilute that down. And we're trying to make 10 barrels of beer. So we'll add another 5 barrels worth of water over top of that, that 5 barrels in the mash, and then pump it into the boil kettle. And then that's what basically the whole mashing process is. And then, yeah, so that's pretty much the whole thing, I guess. We'll go move on to the Josh can talk about the boil aspect, the whole second half of a brew day.
So I'm Josh Weise, one of the other brewers here at Raquette River Brewing. And so once we get all that wort into the boil kettle, we're gonna heat that up to 212 degrees and boil. And so what we do is these are pelletized hops that we use in the boil. If you add them at the beginning of your boil, you're gonna get a much more bitterness out of these hops. You're not gonna get as much of a flavor. It's just your bitterness, like more like IPAs and like stuff like that. Towards the end of the boil, you're gonna get more of a flavor and a profile that you want to have in beer, your beer, whatever you're going for at that time. So what we do is, let's set these down. We're gonna take that wort and we are going to send it out of our brew kettle over here. And it's going to come through pipes over here that go straight into our heat exchanger. This is what takes our boiling wort and brings it down to what is usually around 67 degrees. If it's a lager, it'll be a colder temperature. Lagers will ferment colder, ales will ferment at a higher temperature. So in real time, we can take 200 to 210 degree wort and bring it down to basically what is room temperature through this. So we send water through one side of these, and the other side is our wort, and it transfers the heat over to the water, which we also reuse back into our hot liquor tank of filtered water. So that, you know, a way to reduce our carbon footprint of, you know, overusing. So what happens from here is we will transfer out of the heat exchanger, and we're going to be going over to a fermenter. So these are our fermenters over here. This is one of our transfer hoses right here. We are going to run, so we'll run in cold water through that heat exchanger, bringing that wort down to temperature. It's going through this hose, and it's going into our fermenters from the bottom. And as that fills up, our boil kettle is going to lower. Once we get all of our wort over into the fermenter, we are going to pitch yeast on this, and that's where you're going to really create alcohol. So yeast eats the sugars that are in the wort that you put into this fermenter and creates CO2 and ethanol, which is what you're creating here. So in general, that is the entire process of what we're doing here. So I hope you guys liked it. Hope you think it's cool. Ask a bunch of questions, we're ready to answer them. And I'll turn it back over.
Thank you. So we'll introduce you to Garrett Kopp from Birch Boys. So go ahead, Garrett, take it away.
Thanks, everyone. My name is Garrett Kopp, and I started a company called Birch Boys. We sell chaga, and I'm going to share my screen and show you guys a few visuals as I talk about what chaga is. And feel free to ask any questions you may have as I'm going here, and that might help prompt some interesting conversation. Okay, so this is chaga. It is a fungus that grows on birch trees. It can grow on any birch tree, white birch trees, yellow birch trees, river birch trees. In fact, it can even grow on a couple other trees in rare situations. The scientific name is Inonotus obliquus, and the first word of that scientific name, Inonotus, means to penetrate. So that is because chaga spores will find a crevice in the bark of the tree and infiltrate the bark. So they penetrate the bark, and that's how chaga starts to grow. This is an interesting visual that kind of represents chaga's reproductive cycle. It has a murderous lust for birch trees. And online, if you look up chaga, you're going to find a lot of inaccurate characterizations of this relationship as a symbiotic relationship, but that is not true. Chaga actually is a parasite to living birch trees. And the part we call chaga is a fungal organ called a sclerotia. And a sclerotia is really like a nutrient source for the fungus that lives within the tree. And that fungus will infiltrate the entire vertical length of that host tree. And eventually, when it is time to reproduce, it rips open the bark vertically across the tree trunk, and it reveals this reproductive structure called a poroid. And that is where the spores come out. So chaga isn't technically a mushroom. A mushroom is the spore-bearing fruit of a fungus, but the part that we call chaga doesn't bear spores. That's the sclerotia, and the spores come out of the tree's heartwood, basically. I learned about chaga from my grandmother, who you can see here on the left side of the screen. She and the Tupper Lake Adult Center had gone on this foraging trip to Maine, where they learned about chaga. And lo and behold, when they returned, my grandmother found chaga growing on a birch tree right in her backyard. So she started harvesting that chaga from the tree in her yard, piece by piece, and she only used it as needed. And she, I guess, incidentally introduced me to chaga because I used to mow her lawn, and I came inside to get a drink, and I ended up inadvertently drinking a cup of chaga tea. And she walked into the kitchen and saw that I was drinking her chaga, and she thought it was just a riot. And she told me the story of the king of herbs, as she called it. And she pulled me into the backyard and showed me where the chaga grew on her birch tree. So after that, I was camping, and I was just looking for firewood, and I went out into the woods. It was just a few weeks after being exposed to chaga for the first time, and I was looking for birch bark to use as kindling for my fire. And right in front of me, I noticed a whole bunch of chaga, and I started looking around, and it was just everywhere. So I harvested it because my grandma had told me to keep an eye out for it, and it became a whole thing in the adult center in the community of Tupper Lake. And both of my grandmothers actually got into it, and we'd go around whacking at chaga with their canes way up in the trees, and it was a really great time. But my grandma used to go to these vendor events, some actually at the Adirondack Museum, some at the Wild Center, and she would sell knitted pot holders and mittens and things that she would knit because she would spin wool and do that sort of thing. So that's how I ended up taking chaga to a farmer's market for my first time at the Wild Center. And that is that picture you see there on the bottom right. Today, these are the products we sell out of chaga. Chaga has been traditionally brewed into a tea by indigenous people all across North America and the whole world. It apparently originated in Russia, where the Khanty tribe used it as an immune boosting tea. So it brews like a very dark black tea, but it has a surprisingly mild flavor for as dark as it gets. Some people use it as a coffee substitute because in addition to its immune boosting antioxidant concentration, it contains a naturally occurring steroid called inotodiol, which helps your body convert food into usable energy. So that's really why people brew chaga into a tea. We sell chaga as tea bags. We also sell it in bulk for brewing in a crock pot. We make chaga tinctures as well, which is basically a dual extract that uses not only hot water, but also alcohol to extract the non-water soluble components out of the chaga. This is what chaga looks like on the inside, where it has that black melanin outer part. On the inside, it's actually bright orange, and it's very beautiful, if you ask me. Chaga can get pretty big. These are just two examples of individual pieces of chaga that each weighed over 30 pounds. So You can really get a lot out of a single piece of chaga. We lease 200,000 acres of private timberland here in the Adirondack Park for chaga harvesting. We're extremely dedicated to sustainability. So we have a whole blog on our website that explains the 9 steps of our basically our sustainable protocols. But to make a long story short, we don't harvest chaga in any area that chaga is in lack or that chaga is lacking. We actually count the number of poroids, again, this reproductive structure here, and we make sure that there's basically a greater ratio of poroids to active chaga in any area before we begin harvesting, so that we know that the chaga is actually going to be there spreading and reproducing in the future. And it grows, like I said, on white and yellow birch trees. We're fortunate in the Adirondacks to have the yellow birch tree, Betula alleganiensis, whereas in Russia or Alaska or some of the other chaga hotspots of the world, they really only have the white birch tree or paper birch tree. And I think that lends the Adirondacks to a really unique abundance of chaga. These massive pieces I was showing you really only come from the yellow birch tree when they get that large. And that's everything I have on chaga. I know you guys probably want to talk about how this collaboration came to be. So I'll turn it over to the group for any questions that anyone may have.
All right. Does anybody from our audience have anything that they'd like to ask? You can feel free to put it in the Q&A section, and I'll be happy to.
Yeah, Josh and Tanner, thanks so much for sharing what you know about brewing beer and about chaga. Raquette River Brewing and have a really unique collaboration. Could you tell us a little bit about how Chugga Chugga Chaga came to be?
Yeah. Do you guys want to go first, or?
Well, yeah, if I think, Gary, it was your idea originally, I believe, right?
Yeah, it was. I remember years ago, my dad had talked to Mark Jesse, and he's one of the owners of Raquette River Brewing, and said that he may be open to the idea of it. And I reached out to Mark. This must have been in 2017 or 2018, and I guess.
And it'd be good for Birch Boys and Raquette River and for Tupper Lake. So. Local helping local. And I'm pretty sure we're the only ones that have ever done it, as far as I know. So it was like a cool experiment for everybody.
Somebody just asked, where does chaga get added in the brewing process? And I'll defer to you guys on that.
Okay. So we add it towards the end of the boil. So we steep it basically just like you would a tea. And they're like, what would you say the chunks are? Like 2 by 2 inch, they're pretty small.
They're like the size of a golf ball or smaller.
Yeah. So we submerge that into our wort and let all that flavor just be boiled like right through that and pull that out. That is when we introduce it.
Yeah, just like making tea, I guess, when we're boiling, and we'll add it. But yeah, it's not the full 60 minutes.
Where do you?
It'll last like 10.
Somebody asked, buy a chaga beer.
Where do you buy it?
Yeah.
That is the Loaded question.
Yeah, go through like distributors, so it's harder for us to answer exactly where, but pretty much all over, I would say all over most of the Adirondacks. Not sure if we're out towards like Blue Mountain Lake yet, but I know where we might, like most of northern New York, you can get the 4-packs of the China here.
It's been out to Watertown, out to Plattsburgh, and many places.
Yeah, and Potsdam, Messina.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Potsdam Food Co-op sells it. I know that for sure.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah.
At most redemption centers, they carry a lot of our variety. So like it's a lot of places have our beer, but they might not have chaga beer. They'll probably they just buy like IPA or something. But like the redemption centers are pretty good about getting a ton of variety. And I would say you could get them at most of them.
We try to keep as accurate as we can, up to date list on our website of where you can find our beer. And Chaga is usually going to most of the places that order from us in general. So if you go on our website, you can usually find a general area of where you can purchase it.
Somebody also asked if there was a discernible taste of chaga in the beer, which is an interesting question. I mean, chaga definitely has a very mild flavor, like I said, even for how dark it gets. So in the small focus group that I asked the first time I tried the chaga beer, and this includes my opinion, I felt that I could detect the flavor of the chaga, but it's very subtle. It kind of gets overpowered.
Yeah, and in the with beer, there's so much flavor in beer by itself with all the grains and stuff, especially in a brown ale. There's so much, a lot of different flavors going on. But I definitely feel like there's there is an earthy character to the beer, and I think you can taste it very subtly, but it's not like an overpowering flavor in the beer or anything like that. It's very subtle.
Which is kind of like playing off of that, like it's kind of why we went with like a honey brown ale to kind of accent like the idea of chaga, like to be like kind of like a tea, even though it is like a beer. So,
Right. Yeah.
Someone asked how much chaga needs to be added. I know we add 7 pounds to the
Yeah.
beer.
per batch, yeah.
What is it?
7 pounds per 10 barrels of beer.
Yeah. And 7 to 10 pounds or something like that.
What's the chaga potency of the ale compared to the tea? And any southern Adirondack locations for picking some up? Someone also asked how much of the chaga beer you produce is it on tap or bottled?
It's on tap and in cans. As far as the question about like compared like the tap, like whatever the basically how much chaga is in the beer versus the tea, I thought we tried to do it so it was almost a similar amount based off of how many gallons are in a batch. I thought we tried to do that. I mean, it's probably close to that. It is several pounds. Whereas if you're making a tea, it's just in a little tea bag,
Right. If it helps put it into perspective, there's 2 grams of chaga in a tea bag. So 1 pound would make like 224 cups of tea. So I don't know, there's some complicated math there, but I think what you guys said is pretty consistent with my thoughts. Yeah.
It's around like 1,500.
Someone asked if they could see the Chugga Chugga Chaga can.
Oh yeah, we actually have her here. I thought that was gonna come up. So
Yeah.
So this was actually based off of Underwood Bridge, which is actually a prime location, according to Garrett, for his chaga that he gets. But Yeah, my wife and I, like my wife draws all these labels and we kayaked out there to take this picture to like base the label off of it because Garrett had told us that this was part of his family's land that he works from.
Yeah, there's a lot of chaga back there that we've harvested. I see there's another question that says, what are the health benefits and is there enough chaga in the beer to receive the health benefits? Someone also asked, between the grains protein and the chaga medicinal properties, would you recommend this as a breakfast or daily beverage? And I'll just jump in here.
Yeah, for breakfast.
Yeah, it's obviously a tricky situation trying to market the health benefits of chaga as it is without including it into a beer. So I don't think that we can really speak to any health benefits of chaga within a beer. But what's that?
It's a territory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Legally, we are not on our end allowed to say there's any health benefits inside of here.
But I think someone that is well versed and knows what chaga is understands, the potential like it could have. So
Right.
I mean, yeah.
Someone also asked if they think chaga can be found on Cape Cod. I would guess probably not, but it really is dependent on the availability of like host birch trees. So if there's like a decent amount of older, decent sized birch trees, then it's possible. I know there's been chaga found as far south as Texas, actually. So anywhere that you're going to find birch trees, chaga is likely to grow somewhere.
And Josh and Tanner, we've been talking about adding chaga to a brown ale. Do you have any advice for home brewers for adding other local flavors to beers like maple or berries or anything like that?
So I mean, there's you could do this spring. You're a home brewer, I guess. Is this and it's been a common thing in beer for a very long time, especially before when settlers really got into North America. Before there was hop plants around, they would bitter their beers with spruce tips, and that's like a local something you get locally. You get a spruce or a spruce tree in your yard, you could get it right from there. And especially on a homebrew level, you don't need very much at all. And yeah, so then that's when, spring, at least where we are, it's still too early. The regrowth hasn't really started yet, but in the coming weeks, we'll be prime spruce tip harvesting. So yeah. And then we make a beer with maple too, yeah. Our maple cream porter. That's that locally sourced maple syrup. And yeah, I think those are the only two ingredients that I know of that I like used commonly in beer.
But for maple wise, like we introduce it in two different ways. We do some in the boil, and we also do some straight into our fermenter, into fermentation. So the yeast will also eat the sugars from the maple syrup in fermentation in the fermenter, and we'll bump ABV and get us a higher alcohol content.
And I think another common one that people do is like dandelion beers. I've heard of those before. And I think you can get dandelions everywhere in the world, so that's another option.
So I see a bunch of questions in here about chaga still. So there's one interesting one. Well, they're all interesting, but since the chaga is a parasite, will it eventually kill the birch tree? And how do you incorporate that into your strategy for harvesting? That is a really cool question. It will eventually kill the birch tree. And that's basically at the same time that the chaga sclerotia will reach its maximum peak in size and weight. And that's when it will develop its reproductive poroid. And that is like ideally, the perfect time for us to harvest chaga is right at that moment, because 3 months or so after the chaga sporulates and produces that poroid, killing the birch tree, the chaga is still going to be good and harvestable. And if you can time it accurately, where you can go harvest once it's done that, you can basically maximize your yield and maximize the sustainability of the harvest, because that chaga will then still have the opportunity to produce spores. And Eileen asked that she understands birch sap has medicinal properties. Would the presence of chaga affect that? I would say, if anything, the chaga kind of rides off of that, and it really concentrates a lot of the naturally occurring compounds that are beneficial in the birch. So I would say, if anything, it's the compounds of the birch that make chaga so healing. People are asking, what are the benefits of chaga in general? Chaga is really great for nourishing the immune system. It's the most rich source of antioxidants of any naturally occurring substance on Earth. So that's great for antioxidative benefits and protection from oxidative stress in your body, protection from free radical damage. And chaga has some long chain compounds. The ones that are actually extracted by alcohol include some triterpenes and some birch compounds like betulin and betulinic acid, which are being studied for anti-cancer properties. So it's pretty wide ranging, but really just overall modulating the immune system and strengthening the immune system is what chaga is really good for. And then Kathy asked if the honey in the beer is Adirondack sourced too.
Yep.
Adirondack honey.
Yeah, that is actually the brand of the honey we buy. Is that lady that does it? It's, yeah,
Autumn Malone. Yep.
yeah, Adirondack honey. But it's like just Malone, I think, just outside Adirondacks, or at least the blue line, I think, runs right almost through Malone. Like, yeah, it's locally sourced.
We also use a honey malt to accent that character. The honey itself is more of like a dry mouthfeel to the beer, and the honey malt itself will give more of the sweetness.
Great. Well, we want to thank Garrett, Josh, and Tanner again for a wonderful program. We have the links to both businesses in the chat, so please check out their websites and plan a trip to Tupper to visit both businesses. We'd like to thank all of you for your questions tonight. And before we sign off, we just want to let everyone know that we do have 2 more programs this month. On April 18th, the Artist and Inspiration Series continues with Exploring Connections Between Land and Landscapes, which will be a conversation between our Chief Curator, Laura Rice, and Eleanor Harvey, who's the Senior Curator at the Smithsonian's American Art Museum. Then on April 20th, we'll continue the DACKS Drinks series with History with a Twist, and we'll be looking at the history of Adirondack bootlegging. So please check the website for more information and to register for the programs. We'd like to encourage everyone to visit Raquette River Brewing, Birch Boys, the Albany Public Library, and the museum, which will open on May 27th. And thank you again to Garrett, Josh, and Tanner, and to Will, and to all of you for joining us tonight. Thank you and have a good night.